Good morning. Good morning and welcome to the second annual Northwest Illinois Volunteerism Conference. I'm Pam Clark-Reidenbach with the Northern Illinois Center for Nonprofit Excellence. And Billy Callahan is with us behind the scenes, working our technology. She's our Associate Director. NICNE and the Leadership Exchange on Volunteerism participants, with the support from the Serve Illinois Commission, A.J. Gallagher and Company, and Imperial Punch of Rockford, have presented a full year of online interactive volunteer management programming focused on creating a culture of belonging in volunteerism. Each monthly session includes a 1-hour presentation, followed by 1-hour group discussion, moderated by our friends, Keri Asevedo and Martesha Brown. We ask all participants to mute their computers for better reception for all and to type questions into the chat box. You'll have an opportunity at the end and during the discussion portion to unmute and participate in conversation around today's topic. So let's get started. It is truly my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, who will be speaking on the topic of belonging, living and achieving the basics in organizational excellence. We are fortunate to have Ron Clewer with us today. Ron is the Illinois Market President for GORMAN and Company. Prior to joining GORMAN, he served as COO of the Alliance for Strong Families and Communities, where he was responsible for operations of the National Association Operations Center in Milwaukee and the Public Policy Office in Washington, D.C., including driving the National Strategic Action Network's commitment to expanding equity, diversity, and inclusion. Ron is a valued friend of NICNE, and we are so pleased to have him speaking with us today. Please give a warm welcome to Ron Clewer.
Morning, everyone. Let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started. It's exciting for me to be here with you all today, and I'm looking forward to good and hopefully valued discussion. Oops, sorry. Let's get back to the beginning. But a little bit first before we jump in and talk about belonging and achieving organizational excellence. So I just want to share, and Pam, thank you for the introduction, and a little bit about my history, both with RHA and the Alliance for Strong Families and Communities, where we worked, diligently to advance a diversity, equity, and inclusion approach. But now you may wonder, well, he's in this for-profit space of real estate development, and is it relevant? Is he talking as a past effort? And the answer is absolutely not. And so I want us all to consider the continued blurring lines between nonprofit and for-profit entities. I have to say the reason I joined GORMAN and Company was they're one of the most socially responsible for-profit companies I know, and especially for real estate development. We really lean in on doing what is right always, and we have a saying of protecting our reputation at all costs. And I know some may think about that and say, at all costs, is that a negative? And it's not, it's absolutely a positive. And so we want to make sure that we're doing what absolutely the most we can to ensure our work is helping communities and not harming them, and bringing people together. And so I know while, we may have some recollection of things in our community where it didn't seem that way, as we advanced the Grove project with RHA when I was in leadership there, and GORMAN moved forward alongside of us, we drove the discussion around how do we get folks in our community to feel they belong in neighborhoods that maybe we hadn't considered before. So not speaking today from past experience alone, but even our current state. And I'll use current examples of a for-profit company, but also of nonprofits on how we move forward with the idea of creating a culture of belonging, and give examples, because I think the one most relevant takeaway we should all consider is that there is no magic answer. There's no one size solution. And it's so personal and independent to every organization out there that as you lead your organization or choose to manage your organization, I encourage you to think about the co-creation of activities together that build a culture of trust and of belonging. I want to make sure everybody can see my screen okay. Before we get started, would you please do me a favor and go ahead and put in the chat feature the letter in which you were in, represents the period in which you were born. So A would be that period 1946 to 1964, B 1965 to 79, etc. If for some reason we're lucky enough to have folks who were born before 1946 or after 2009 here, just go ahead and put an O. But I'm curious of the demographics of the folks we have on the call. I'll give you a minute to go ahead and do that, and I'll look here. Hey, Harlan. I see we have 2 O's. That's awesome. 3. Some A's, B's, C's. Okay. I know, and some of us don't want to talk about our age. Some of us do want to talk about our age. So if you didn't answer, that's okay. The whole purpose of this is really to get us to understand we're all coming from different places. And we could have done this exercise with sex, race, other identities that we all may have. But it was really important for me to truly help us understand, where we are. And so the reason in part of our recap, I wanted to do that is to think about the nonprofit diversity. And so I know you've all gone through a lot of these discussions over the last several months, but as nonprofit leaders, we think about the makeup of our organizations. It is still interesting to me and the work we did at the Alliance that 45% of organizational leadership is female. Only 10% of leadership are people of color and 11% are in that 25 to 44 range. And so there are 1.7 million active nonprofits in our nation today, and we know hundreds here in our community. So as we look up at the makeup of our organizations from either the board perspective or the staff perspective, leadership perspective, how are we representing the communities we intend to serve? So I think that's important from a diversity, equity, inclusion standpoint. However, I think we have to be very careful as we look at DEI, and I ask everybody to consider it EDI. I've always looked at it as equity, diversity, and inclusion because equity should be the value we come to the table with and say we want to achieve equity across our organizations within our community, or we want to deliver equity, cause equity to happen, instill equity. Not first on diversity, because what we found in our work at the Alliance is those organizations focused first on diversity really just delivered checkbox results. And then the folks who came into their community or their company, their organization, didn't feel that they were welcome. They didn't feel they belonged, and they didn't feel included. And so we definitely need to think about that as we move forward. I'm just going to touch on this very quickly. This is Indeed, and while it's again for-profit statement, it was very much what we saw continue to happen in nonprofits. That if we are diverse, we see an increase in innovation, creativity, and strategic thinking. That better decisions come from diverse teams. That more job seekers are saying it's important to prioritize diversity and inclusion. You'll see that because we're seeing more and more millennials and Gen Zs come into the workforce, and so they're grounded, centered, focused on diversity and inclusion. And if we're not delivering that in our organizations or communities, they'll go elsewhere. That organizations who are focused on engaging employees around inclusion and belonging have more productive and innovative employees, and they're more loyal to your company. They're more loyal to your organization. And it also does a great deal, obviously, to improve your reputation as an organization if you're walking the walk, not just talking the talk. And so a little bit I want to touch here on is that conversion from DEI to EDI that I mentioned, that we move into equity being the value that centered us around diversity and inclusion. And then obviously, a few years ago, belonging came to the, conversation that folks want to feel they have a sense of belonging in your organization. They feel that they're a valued member of the team. And now what we're seeing this year, and I'll touch on this a little bit here in a recent survey, is folks are moving to the idea of well-being. And so well-being across teams gets beyond the, we're diverse and inclusive, and we've created a place where people feel they belong. But teams together are really feeling happy, productive, and that, together they can prosper. And now when I say together they can prosper, it's not just about the money, right? It's about achieving mission. It's about achieving outcomes, and that together all parties to the team are making a difference. So well-being, as we continue to go forward, is going to, I believe, continue to be part of the discussion around diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's also going to be part of the discussion around belonging. So these are the definitions, and I believe Pam and Billy, you send this slide deck out to everybody. They have access to the recording. I'm not going to go into these definitions deeply. I just want to focus on well-being and say it's the condition of an individual or organization characterized by health, happiness, and prosperity, as we just said. So do you have a healthy organization who's truly centered around your employees and those that you serve? And so why is this important? In the 2020 Global Human Capital Trends Survey, the idea of belonging really rose up over years past. So this is a survey of thousands of organizations. And what it said was that 79% said belonging is important to their organization. 93% said belonging drives their operational performance, but only 13% said they were ready to address it. And so that's the readiness gap. So today, as we talk about how do we create cultures of belonging, we'll identify ideas and we'll work together to co-create some that may work in some organizations, but may not work in others. Again, it's highly personal. So what absolutely affects this culture of belonging? It's organizational culture, right? And it comes from leadership. So in our work at GORMAN, I can share with you that our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee was not formed by leadership, but leadership, our CEO, came to our executive team and asked why we didn't have one. And so we asked our staff, and our staff said, we want one. And so it was forming just about the time that George Floyd's murder occurred. And so the timing of it was coincidental. However, the motivation was even stronger afterwards. And so we're very lucky that our leadership at GORMAN says we're not standing in the way of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. We're absolutely a part of it. But this is an effort led by our staff, for our staff, and fully supported by leadership. In times when it goes right and in times when it goes wrong, because I can assure you, there are times when not all people feel exactly the same way. So a quick activity here. When you look back over the course of your career, what aspects of work culture made you really connected to your company? And what is your organization doing to help staff and volunteers feel part of that culture? So why don't we go ahead and take about 2 minutes and talk a little bit through that. Are there any volunteers who want to come back and just give us some insight into something that made you feel that you were connected to your culture at a company and it made you feel important, or B, you're doing? Any brave souls out there want to venture in?
Hi, my name is Barb Ferry. I'm with the Forest Preserve District of Will County. I've been a volunteer for about 21 years there. And I think part of staying with that particular group is because we're all like-minded people. We're all for the conservation of the ecology and the environment around us, and wanting to leave it as a living legacy, so to speak, for the future generations. So I think that helped me stay with my group. And another thing, the paid staff is just absolutely wonderful, embracing the volunteers that work for and with them. It's not that we're not, a paid person, but we are paid in a different way. We see the fruits of the labors that we do. We see the fruits of all the activities that we hold, the events, people enjoying the out of doors that we so tenderly take care of. So it's a win-win for me.
Thank you, Barb. So what I heard you say, and it's kind of root there, is that you're all unified around a common purpose. Right?
Correct. Yes.
So in that purpose, are there times when perhaps, folks may have different feelings about actions or activities or work, but because of that common purpose, you're drawn together and you do what's best for the greater good in making sure?
I think it is, and a lot of times too, they're willing to bend a little. It's not always of a culture that we've always done it this way. As things evolve and change, they're open to evolve and change as well. I remember at one point in time, I raised monarchs during the summer. So at one point in time, we're talking about, planting the native plants to bring back the native insects, things like that. And I said, I'd really like to bring a, like one of those science trifolds that the kids use in the science fairs. I was like, I want to bring one of those and have, like butterfly things and pollinator plants and the like. And my volunteer coordinator said, why don't we get together with our person that does the flyers and such, see if we can develop a take with something that's small enough to fit on a table that we could put out and show the people what we're really wanting to do, so it looks a little bit more professional. So myself, my volunteer coordinator, and our I'm at a loss for what he's actually called,
That's
but
okay.
he pardon me?
I said, that's okay.
He does the visuals for everybody. We all got together and devised this visual, and it's beautiful, it's fun, it's portable, and we've taken it to many, many places, and it's been a real eye catcher.
That's
So
excellent.
they're willing to change and shift.
Excellent. Thanks, Barb. Afterwards, I'm going to ask that you shoot me an email message. We're doing a lot of pollinator work in my neighborhood. I'd love to pick your brain. So.
Oh, awesome. I will. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you. Anybody else? A quick example? No? Well, why don't we go ahead and let's move on to the next slide here. Oh. So we just looked at the 2020 Global Human Trends Survey, and now we're looking at the 2021. So I just want to make sure everybody knows I didn't go backwards, I went forwards. But here, this is where well-being really came over the top of belonging. And so through the Global Human Capital Needs Survey done by Deloitte, we found that 80% now said well-being was important to organizational success, and that only 12% were ready to address it. And so again, the readiness gap there is, how do we address what our folks in our organizations, whether they're for-profit or nonprofit, because this was across both sectors, what are we ready, willing, and able to do to meet their needs, right? We want happy employees, we want happy volunteers. And so why is this so important, and why does it seem to be evolving so quickly? Well, we see that our generational timeline, and those that are in the workforce, we'll look at in a moment here, but those in the gray box, Gen Xers, Millennials, Gen Zs, and forward, are really, really rooted and focused on equity and making sure we're building diverse teams. Now, that's not to say that boomers and the silent generation, the greatest generation before them, were not, but it was not a place, or at least it was not so fixated or focused on in the workplace or in our volunteer space. It was a value, I'm sure, by many, but it's really become a strong and visible value by many more in our current generations in the workforce. So if we look at this slide just real quickly, this is who's currently in our workforce and the projection to get to 2025. So if we start over here on the right side, we see that the silent generation is exiting the workforce. The boomers are also exiting. As a reminder, 10,000 boomers are retiring on a daily basis. So it's a very quick exodus. And what we found is COVID has exacerbated that exodus. Generation X is also in its stable space in the workforce, however, getting to retirement age. And our millennial workforce right now is just over 70%, about 73% of our workforce, come 2025, I should say. And you see Gen Z is really starting to come into the workforce. And so how are we looking at this trend? Because it applies not to just our workforce, but our volunteer force. How are we relevant to those people who want to come together centered on purpose, as Barb shared with us, to achieve outcomes and mission. So ultimately our organizations are able to deliver on our missions. So where does culture come from? We know that, and we've probably all learned and said that it comes from our leadership. We need to create an environment where people feel they belong to a culture. However, it also shows here that senior executives and individual frontline workers are not really aligned with where and how culture is important. And so individual workers are saying it's much more of a prioritization for them that we improve worker well-being, as opposed to our senior executives who find it further down on the list. So how are we going to synthesize that so we come closer together? And I think as we talk about some of the work we can do to build teams and create that culture, we could close that gap. So one of the areas that is important is an equity statement. So Barb talked about centered around purpose, right? Are we centered around a statement that says these are our beliefs? And then how was that statement created? Was it created by your teams? Did somebody up top create a statement and then bestow it upon everybody to live into? Or, did it come from frontline staff that said, hey, this is what we believe? Anybody have an equity statement that you want to share with us? Anyone?
Hey, Ron, can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Earlier. I don't know if it's a formalized statement. I'm very interested. However, the REC
And Mark, is that, I'm having a hard time hearing you. You're breaking up. Am I the only one, or is everybody having a hard time?
No, I lost her too.
Okay, I'll try to type it in. I'm sorry, Ron. I'll get my
no, you're actually crystal clear right now, whatever you did.
All right, I am leaning into the mic here.
Okay.
So I don't know if it's a formalized equity statement, so I'm very, very intrigued by it, but we've had some continued conversations and statements surrounding ensuring that all of our visitors feel welcome, and that really stems from our community members feeling welcome. And what that looks like is, of course, creating that sense of belonging. And it was created by a committee of diverse individuals in our community, and then also shared with our staff to get their approval, feedback, and insight on what that looks like in agreement with that.
Excellent. Thanks, Martesha. Anyone else want to? Why don't I share ours? So we have one at GORMAN that was created by our staff and a group of folks who came together and said, why is it important that we focus on equity, and why is it important that we become a diverse team? So let's talk about that for a minute, because I want to be entirely transparent. GORMAN and Company, right now we have about just under 500 employees, 3 hotels, 100 plus apartment properties across 8 states. And so it depends on where we are, right? Our corporate office is Oregon, Wisconsin. And so does our corporate office represent the community in which we are in? Oregon, Wisconsin, is almost 90% white. The answer is yes. However, does our Illinois market reflect the communities we work in? And the answer is no, because up until recently, everybody on our team looked like me, or, was the female version of me. And so we sat down and really began to look at diversity, and we discussed the need to definitely become more diverse, but we didn't want to do it without a focus on equity, right? So our team got together and talked about our employees' needs and the need to reach their full potential. And so to us, that leans into the space of well-being, but keep in mind this was done a while ago, so it was before well-being was the topic du jour. But we definitely see that it is very important that all of our team members feel they not only belong, but they're able to achieve their best lives because they choose to work with us. We know they get to choose to work with us, just like people choose to live with us. So after a lot of discussion, our team said they wanted to become an industry leader. That did not come from our leadership. That came from our team. So they started out with, how do we meet each other's needs? And then they said, why do we want to meet each other's needs? And so through that discussion over several months, honestly, it was several months, was to become an industry leader by recognizing and creating the most diverse, equitable, inclusive company culture and team where every employee can reach their full professional potential. Now, right now, we're having discussions about the word professional. Should we only focus on the time they're with us at work? Because we know home life is so important to people's success in their work life. And so as we think about these cultures of belonging and well-being, well-being does not stop at 5 o'clock when they leave the door, right? If they're not happy at home, then likely they're not going to be happy at work. And so that conversation around professional is currently happening. And I think that's the thing to share with all of you. If you've created equity statements or you've created plans around advancing your volunteer base and your workforce base, know that they always should be flexible, right? So yes, you want to have a strong vision. Yes, you want to have strong outcomes and the strategies to get to those outcomes, but are you continually looking at it to see if it's relevant in this point in time? And so, So looking at well-being, there are 6 dimensions that are primarily talked about. There's a lot more, but the importance of co-creating and really evolution of your work and the continued review of that work is, I think, really shown well in this chart. So if you have low volunteer and employee engagement in that left-hand lower corner, what you're going to find is individuals rely mostly on their spiritual practices or their religious practices to feel good. However, and this is done by Deloitte, so it's been a large study on well-being in the workplace. And so if you still have low individual engagement, so volunteers or workforce, but you have high organizational influence, this means the organization is saying, yes, we want folks to feel good at work. We want them to be happy in life. And what you'll find is there's this creation of a sense of belonging, which is interesting. It's misspelled, workplace design and workplace culture. So it becomes very rigid efforts, right? So it's bestowed upon the folks who work within a company or live within a community. Now, if you have high individual engagement, but very low organizational influence, you'll see outside of work that individuals, feel pretty good about life, right? They have financial security, they have leisure activities, they have a close networks of friends, they have a good relationship with family. However, they're still not satisfied at work. And so we know right now of millennials, only about 20% actually feel satisfied at work. And I'm saying that about millennials, not to pick on millennials, but because they're our largest portion of our workforce and volunteer force right now. So the work we are doing is not making them happy. And so look over.
I'm picking on us.
Sorry?
You're picking on us. It's okay.
No, okay. I'm not picking on you. I'm trying to make it better. So if we achieve higher individual influence and higher organizational influence, now we find what I think is always going to be elusive, which is work-life balance. However, there are times work's going to win. There's going to be times when life's going to win, and an engaged and understanding employer or volunteer coordinator will understand that, right? And so they give us the space to be ourselves. We talk about resilience. You find purpose and meaning, as Barb said, that they have, in her organization, and you just find enjoyment, right? Whether that's a career or volunteer service, and you have a great relationship with the people you're around the table at trying to achieve those outcomes. So we want to ensure that we're creating an environment where people are engaged and feel part of the process. And so this is the layout here of how you may do that. I'm not going to go deeply into it. Again, I know you've talked a lot about this. I want to get to where we start to have discussion about co-creation. But I'd encourage everyone to look at, defining where you want to go, creating strategic priorities, and then really looking inwardly at your organizations and organizational infrastructure to say, do you have the operational capabilities to prioritize this? Because if you don't, then you need to ensure that you're building that capacity in your organization to best serve your volunteers and your employees to create this culture, right? So before we move on to some of this, I'm curious, what are folks' personal goals for DEI and belonging and work? And can you easily transfer that or incorporate it into well-being as the vision, right? So you have the vision of the work you want to do, but you want to do it where all folks feel that they belong and they're participating and they feel happy and healthy about the work. And so anybody want to share with us some of their goals? Yeah, everybody's shy this morning. Okay, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we talk about the process a little more, and then I'll share with you a couple of examples. So in creating your plan, because you must be planful if you want to create an environment where all people thrive, right? You do that as organizations to achieve your mission, right? You do strategic planning. From a nonprofit sense, I know NICNE and the Alliance and myself and others have really been focused on how do you turn strategic plans into implementation plans, right? Because nobody wants a plan that sits on the shelf. And so I'll share just a moment here about our work at CASA, because I am on the board at CASA, and we have a wonderful relationship with NICNE there, and we're thankful for that. But we created our strategic plan, about a year ago, and it was a short plan. We were intentional about it being short because the organization has to live into these national standards. So for lack of a better analogy, CASA's almost like a franchise, right? So locally, our CASA organization has to live to the standards created by a national organization and then implemented through a state organization. So kind of like a franchise, but not really. However, we knew that new standards were coming out last year. And so we didn't want to create a very long-term strategic plan because A, that's no longer really relevant in our market, right? It should be, 2 to 3 years. Now, it doesn't mean you can't project 5 years out, but what are you doing in the next 2 to 3 years and how are you assessing it? So we created our plan. Part of that plan was to really dive deep and look at our environment. So what disproportionality exists in our environment in serving children in the juvenile justice court, in the juvenile abuse and neglect court. And what are we doing to understand the representation of our volunteer base to serve those children? Because we know right now that we have about 1,400 kids in abuse and neglect court. We're only serving about 250 to 275 of them. And our children are about 30% Black and our volunteers are about 97% white. And so what are we doing in this space? So we were in our strategic planning process, we included the creation of a diversity, equity, and inclusion plan that would broaden our volunteer base, our staff base, and our board base. And so we're very planful in that. And this month we're meeting again to really not only prioritize, but finalize that plan. And so we started the same way all of us probably start. And so this is really doing deep analysis of the environment we're in, the data we have, et cetera. And then we seek insight, right? So insight is not just all sitting around the table who are, in the room for the plan, which does, by the way, include board staff and volunteers, but it reaches out further. And so what are the influencers in our environment? Who are the other nonprofits that we work with? What's happening in our market? We're thankful for NICNE did the state of nonprofits last year in the midst of COVID, because that helped guide our planning process. But it didn't give us an excuse, if we're going to be honest, right? It requires us to think, how do we do things more innovatively, as we heard Barb talk about in her example. So then we move to planning. Once we get to the planning, we actually work on implementation. How are we going to achieve these? So everything in our strategic plan actually has an owner. It has a department it sits in. It has a timeline and an estimated outcome. And so we monitor that as we move forward. And then we keep those results visible. We go through them in our board meeting every month, and we see if we're making progress on the process. And then we analyze them again. So as I said, we're coming together in June to look at it and say, did the stuff we said we wanted to do over this last 12 months come to fruition? What were we successful at? What were we not successful at? And what do we need to do to adapt, pivot, or change? And so this process is exactly the same thing we would use as we think about how do we create a volunteer and staff plan that's focused on inclusion, creates an environment of belonging, and helps people achieve well-being. Same process. And so when I was at the Alliance, we worked with a number of organizations to create DEI plans, or EDI plans as we called them. And then we stretched them to think about belonging at that time, because belonging was just around the corner and was a conversation that was just happening. And so this is an example of one plan. And so it starts with their equity statement, right? So that purpose that Barb talked about at her organization, it starts with a purpose on the left, and it gives the statement, and then the why, right? So purpose, then the why. And then over to the right, it created a set of objectives and some of the actions and what their desired outcomes they wanted to have. Now, this was focused really on advancing equity in their organization, because at that time they didn't feel that they were an equitable organization. Now, I do have a document I'm happy to give to Pam and Billy to share with the group that has 6 plans identified in it, and it gives examples. It is from the Alliance, and it shows kind of the growth of each organization. And so this is all well and good, but this to me is a strategic plan that has the potential to sit on a shelf, because it didn't create an owner. It assigned a task force. It did have a time, but there wasn't an owner. There wasn't somebody responsible. So they moved it to the equity implementation plan. And so this is what I'm talking about. Those same objectives, same tasks were then shown by task force, but they said, who is accountable to do this in our organization? And it wasn't, it's not like Christine Martin, sorry. Somebody said, Christine, this is your job to do. Christine said, I want to lead that, right? So co-creating these things together, and then, creating ownership through the process, because the process of doing this work is definitely the process of building owners, right? So I just want to focus for a few minutes, and we're going to spend a lot of time, hopefully, co-creating some ideas, because my feeling is it's not my goal today to tell you what to do or how to do it, other than to say co-create it and be inclusive in your efforts. And so when we focused our work together as a team and came up with our DEI approach for GORMAN, we also wanted to make sure everybody on our team knew what we were doing and felt included in the process. So there's a monthly newsletter that goes out to all of our staff. It is not branded GORMAN. It is branded by the DEI team. And at the bottom, it does say, a GORMAN and Company initiative. But we clearly are focused on the DEI component, not the GORMAN component. And so if you look at this picture, this is the newsletter that is actually going out tomorrow. If you look at this picture, Friday. If you look at this picture, it's at the hotel. This was our executive meeting that we had at the hotel, and we brought all of the hotel staff that was on duty at that time forward for a photo. Now, it wasn't to create a photo. It wasn't to create a photo opportunity. What it was intended to do was meet with all of our staff at the hotel to thank them for coming in the midst of COVID and choosing to work, because all know there's a workforce and volunteer crisis right now. So choosing to work, choosing us as their employer, and being committed to the work, and thanking them for creating an environment which we could have our meeting just a few weeks ago. So that's important to us. The focus on our team is always important. Always celebrate your team, always celebrate your successes, always celebrate the little things and show that celebration. And then we do send out quarterly boxes to our team members. So it is difficult, as many of you may know, when you have staff or volunteers or both spread out all over the place, especially in this COVID world where folks have been remote. So we chose, rather than having routine meetings across markets, again, 8 states, a number of different, more than 100 properties, how do we keep those, how do we keep those teams connected? And so we chose not only to have routine meetings, but to mail directly to each of our team members information about our work. So they get this newsletter, but with the newsletter, they also get stuff. And so our work is about education. And I think any good volunteer effort is also inclusive of some form of education around work and mission. And so this particular delivery has information about Gay Pride. It has information about Juneteenth. And then we also do a couple of service days a year, and all of our folks in different markets are able to participate in the Habitat for Humanity build. And we'll spend a day, I believe it's next week, in Rockford with Keri, and we'll build a house together, at least for that day. But the idea is to create opportunities for people to learn together about each other and grow together for each other. And so this work won't be easy, won't be simple, but I do want to share just one other piece. And let's see, the newsletter comes with this video, and then the video and newsletter tee up what they get in the mail from us. So let's see if this works. Let me know, Billy, if you can hear it.
It's time for another package from our GORMAN Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. In this month's box, we give you moments to celebrate, educate, and just have fun. Included you will find information on Gay Pride and Juneteenth. This information presents opportunities to expand our knowledge and learn the importance of these celebrations for members of our teams. And if you're in a market with modest June weather and a Habitat for Humanity organization, you will find opportunities for a day of service to swing a hammer and build a home for low-income individuals moving to build equity and wealth. Each of these opportunities present moments to build trust across your teams, and we hope you will maximize them. There is also a koozie for you and every member of your team. Maybe enjoy a beverage with each other to keep the team building going? As you unpack your DEI box and begin to gather and celebrate, don't forget to grab photos and quotes from your colleagues and send them to us at diversity@gormanusa.com, because we want to bring focus to your team, their work, and their collective growth. Many thanks from your DEI team, and thank you for helping GORMAN & Company become an industry leader by recognizing and creating the most diverse, equitable, and inclusive company culture and team where every team member can reach their full professional potential.
So that is our video that comes with that. And then they'll get this box, and within the box is a learning opportunity around Juneteenth. And so what is Juneteenth? Why is it important to members of our team, and how do we celebrate it? And how do we celebrate it together? So there's a list of Juneteenth activity in every city we're in that is included with this. And there's also a list of Gay Pride activities for our members who want to go to Gay Pride with other team members and support each other. And then, of course, there's the Habitat build opportunity with the dates and times for everybody in the markets where they are. It does say modest weather because we do have properties in Phoenix, Arizona, and they don't do home builds in the summer as we do here because it's generally over 100 degrees, or they do it late at, in the evening after the heat passes. So trying to be cognizant in your work of the environments in which all people are, right? Because it would be very easy for us to lose track of, the weather in Wisconsin's fine in June, right? Should be easy to swing a hammer and not be too hot, but we know that that's a different environment in Arizona. We know for certain markets in Colorado, there still will be snow because they're mountainous regions and there's snow there. So trying to be, informed about our own team members' lives and environments and trying to be conducive to flexibility. And so as we think through these things, what I'm hopeful we can do is really talk about opportunities now
It's
that you may,
time.
that you may have done as organizations so far, so we can all learn from each other. I think that's the best work, as opposed to me telling you what to do and you listening to me any longer. But I do have this question for us to kick us off. Is what cultural and organizational barriers exist within your workplace that make it difficult for people to be vulnerable and human at work? And let's discuss work being done to advance belonging and achieve well-being at that. I'm not asking you necessarily to name things out loud to your colleagues here on the call today about those barriers, but if you choose to, that's absolutely okay. Because I think what's important is if we don't recognize the barriers, our solutions aren't going to be fixated on overcoming them, right? And so this is not about exclusion, it's about inclusion. And if we don't recognize the barriers, we may inadvertently create opportunities where we exclude. Anybody want to share an example? No? So let's talk about
A monocultural workforce is a major barrier.
a monocultural workforce is a major barrier. And I continue to think back about our work at CASA and even our GORMAN work, where we're predominantly white cultures. Now, I do think at CASA we've been very successful in making sure we have a diverse staff. And to be honest, I don't think we've been successful about making them feel like they belong yet. And so we are doing a great deal to ensure that. And let's all be honest, but let's not accept it as an excuse. COVID made it difficult for us to gather, right? But to Barb's comment about being innovative, how did we adapt to ensure in an environment where we couldn't come together in physical space, that we came together in personal space and stayed connected? I can tell you we could have done a better job at GORMAN on that. I can tell you we could have done a better job at CASA on that. And we want to make sure that we continue to adapt so we don't have to say that in the future, but that we continue to live into creating space for people to feel they belong, staff, volunteers, and board members. So who would like to, who would like to kick us off on something they're doing to advance belonging and achieve well-being? This is where I don't want you to be shy, folks. I've got examples, but I'd rather hear you guys talk than me. Let's see where we are. We're at 9:19, so we're a little bit shy of our presentation, which I was hopeful for. But Martesha or Keri, you guys want to kick in and maybe lead us through some moderated discussion if we don't have examples, and maybe that'll help break the ice.
This is Harlan. I'll just mention that the Northern Illinois Institute for the Healing of Racism has reconstituted our board. We now have 12 members. And our focus is an organization we belong to, the Rockford Chamber of Commerce. And the idea is to inspire the Rockford Chamber of Commerce to make DEI a priority for them. And we're working on details of that. And I'll talk to you about that later on.
Sounds good, Arlen. Thank you. Anybody else?
Ron, I'd like your perspective on something that's been tossed around on the different topics in terms of how we, in terms of belonging, how do we call people in without calling them out? How do you hold people accountable without calling them out, but calling them in? I'd love to hear your perspective.
Sure. So we had a little bit of a conversation before it started, before this started. And I'll use that, but then I'd talk personally because that's not a great example. But when I contracted for that video that you saw a moment ago, we sent in the script for that. And, you know, keep in mind, folks can think that, you know, well, we're a large corporation with a big budget. We can, you know, we can do these things. That video costs less than $100. And so just the ability to do unique things to reach people, right? And that was the whole purpose of it, is we can email it out, we could send it out, and we could, you know, try to create an area to bring people in and become engaged and feel, you know, that we're authentic in our engagement. So the team wrote the script for that. I sent it out, contracted for it. The gentleman reached back out to me and said he thought, you know, there was maybe a mistake or he was misunderstanding something because the script said gay pride in it. And so I wasn't sure, you know, what he meant. And was like, no, that's the right script. And then, you know, he went on to tell me that he had issue with saying gay pride. He wouldn't say it. And so long and short of it is we agreed after a lot of, you know, discussion that he wouldn't produce the video. And so he came back afterwards, though, after the agreement, after the refund of the deposit, to tell me how I should look at individuals with LGBTQ in the LGBTQ world, and that I shouldn't be focused on that, even though he thanked me for my work in the social work space. And so it was much more direct than that. But I don't want to perpetuate, you know, what he said. So, you know, part of it in that case was I really struggled with the belonging, Pam, honestly, because I felt like if he were a team member, and so this led to discussion in our DEI team, what if folks get that video and some folks have similar feelings or have feelings differently about other things, right? How do we respond to that, and how do we have the conversation? And so this was a vendor. It was very easy to terminate the relationship, but you know, part of me felt obligated to have the discussion with him even afterwards. But he was trying to convert me. I was never going to convert him. That's not what it was about. But would there be a way to maybe move him in a little bit closer to seek some understanding, as opposed to be so adamantly opposed to? And so that's the focus we had in our discussion about what if staff members, you know, have issues and they come to us. And so the work from the very beginning, we've always said that our DEI committee is your safe place. And so if you have a challenge and if you feel comfortable enough to come to us to talk about it, our HR department and our leadership allows that individual or individuals to bypass HR and come to us to say, we have an issue about something and we want to talk to you. So it's one, setting the tone from the top, that we have the authority and the perspective if people are comfortable. However, if there's something negative that's said and shared across, our HR and our leadership also asks us to come along into that space and be kind of the, you know, not the, so if it's an HR violation, that's a whole nother thing. But if it's, you know, borderline, can we have a conversation that maybe sets the tone and encourages understanding and growth? And so it's very confidential. It's very personal. I think that's the best way to always approach these things, because you don't want to call somebody out in public and make them look bad or make them feel bad. Now, keep in mind, this is where there's just maybe misunderstanding or a lack of understanding, and you're trying to help create understanding. It's not the true outward expression of hate. And I'm going to tell you, I don't have the answer for that, because That was one of my struggles at RHA when we were doing the Grove stuff, and we saw true outright examples of hate coming through. And what we said, the best road we could take is the high road about information and not get into a debate over such ignorance, because there was no way we were going to change those minds, right? Now, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't attempt to, because we absolutely must. But I don't see that there was anything gained, in my opinion, and I'm just one individual, in my opinion, to have a public battle over such ignorance, because I felt too many people got hurt in those discussions. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Yeah.
That's my opinion. Others may disagree. So
I agree, Ron. Hear me, I was having some problems with audio. Okay, I completely agree. We went
Okay.
through a,
You're still breaking up, Martesha. You might want to switch to phone for sound.
okay, let's give Martesha a moment to switch to a phone.
While we do that, we had a question from Ed Lichtenstein in the chat. He had asked, within the context of an organization, DEI can be a critical element of an organization's ability to achieve its mission. So in getting your organization ready to address DEI, how do you relate that effort to mission accomplishment? Like, what would the organization look like and be like if the level of minimally desired DEI is both defined and accomplished? And he also wants to think around how you determine both the current state and the minimally acceptable level of accomplishment.
So I think from my perspective, we need to look at data, right? Everything today is about data. And so from a diverse standpoint, let's just talk about minimally acceptable, representing the folks you intend to serve, right? So depending on the organization, depending on the group of individuals you intend to serve, does your volunteer base, does your staff base, does your board represent those individuals in a similar capacity? You know, are you similarly structured from a percentage of individuals on your board, on your staff, in your volunteer base that look like or have similar backgrounds to the folks you intend to serve? Now, that's dangerous because, again, that's a diversity only approach. It doesn't necessarily suggest that you're achieving equity. It doesn't suggest that you're achieving belonging or well-being. It just simply says that from a demographic standpoint, you match. And so that to me is what many, in my experience, have looked at as the minimally acceptable. And I'm going to challenge everybody to say, please don't let that be the minimally acceptable. Work to ensure that you have a culture where folks see equity. And so if you've had marginalized populations that you intend to serve, how are you, I don't want to say overcompensating, but how are you providing enough resources to overcome disproportionality and challenges that have affected these individuals over time? And so are you thinking about, okay, maybe we need more folks with lived experience on our board than we currently have, or we need more folks in our staff with lived experience because they can understand and relate. And then how are you, so what will it look like? I hope that it gives a little bit of an example, but I think at the end, what it really looks like is if you've achieved those things. One of the things we really pushed for when I was at the Alliance was doing employee engagement satisfaction surveys. I can tell you, as a national organization, when they did their first one, which was before I came on board, staff felt disconnected, didn't feel engaged, and didn't feel like they had an opportunity to participate. And so it was interesting to dive deep into that when I became the chief operating officer, to understand the feelings behind it, because there are feelings behind it. And it's difficult in a workplace to talk about feelings, but it's essential, especially in our work, right? We've all heard about emotional intelligence. What level of emotional intelligence are you bringing to the organization? And so it really looks like folks feel engaged and are happy at work when you do those satisfaction surveys over time. So understanding your current space in the area of demographics in relationship to those you intend to serve. Demographics, not just about race, it's about age, it's about sex, it's about, you know, monetary position, economic space, and it's about lived experience. And so don't forget those last ones. It's unhelpful in my world, and I know there's the best of intentions. If I offend anybody, I apologize. But working in the space of poverty, we know the most influential and desirous people with time on their hands are typically wealthy white women. Now, if that's what your whole volunteer base is and your whole board is and your staff base, you're not really working to represent the folks because there's not the lived experience, right? So really think through that. But long term, are you moving the needle on the participatory engagement of people in your organization? So it's not just staff, it's not just board, it's your volunteers, and it's those around you who do the work with you. And so when you're looking to engage folks in a survey of your success, don't just focus it on staff and board, focus it on the volunteers if you have them, and also the community around you that you work with on a routine basis alongside your staff and your board. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Ron. Can you guys hear me?
Perfectly.
All right, awesome. I really appreciate your presentation, and I know that we will be moving into the discussion portion of our presentation. And just wanted to, again, just thank you for all the information you shared. You are more than welcome to join us and continue as part of this discussion. But what we want to do here is take a quick break, warm up your coffee. We're going to take a quick 5-minute break, and we will come back and let's really dig into this discussion.
Thanks, Martesha.
Thank you, Ron. Test. I'm just confirming. Can everyone still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Sorry about all the tech issues. I don't know what's going on here.
No worries. You want me to stop sharing the screen while we're waiting?
Yes, you can do that.
Okay. Dang it. There we go. So now I get an opportunity to look at the comments, and there's some great comments, and appreciate everybody's involvement in the comment section. And Barb did ask for my email. It is at the end of the PowerPoint today, but I'll go ahead and put it in the comments section.
All right, everyone, if you haven't already joined on, if you are able to, please hop on screen. We'll get started with our conversation here. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Again, a special thank you to Ron for this very, very insightful conversation. I definitely have been taking a ton of notes here and screenshotting some of the data that you shared. So again, very, very insightful. As we get started, we want to kick this off with the question that we ask, I think, just about every discussion that we kick off with. And this is simply, what was your aha moment? What was your aha moment? What was a statement or something that was shown by Ron that really just set off an internal light bulb? What was your aha moment?
I'll share one.
Yeah.
I really liked the newsletter approach of not branding that for the organization. So it was more about results and community and not about brand building. I thought that was really powerful.
I agree. That was one of the screenshots I took, Billy. Really, like you said, focused on more of the DEIB and not so much of the organization. I thought that was pretty great. We have a note here from Jennifer. She said her aha moment was EDI instead of DEI. Can you expand on that a little bit more? I see Pam shaking her head. Yes, was that also an aha moment for you, Pam?
Yeah, it was equity first instead of diversity first.
Yeah.
Diversity is a check the box, right? And equity is takes a little bit more intentional effort and work. So I that resonated with me as well.
Absolutely. I agree. It's definitely going to be a retraining for me on how to say that, but definitely very, very important. Any other aha moments?
This is Catherine Gorman. I liked all of the statistics that sampled different companies and showing how important well-being is, but also that what well-being is defined as and all, it should be collaborative with the leadership and the staff, not just the top-down definition.
I absolutely agree with that. That was definitely a key point that I wrote down as well. Definitely an aha moment. I kind of spanning from that, I think an aha moment for me was the wording that stated on one of the slides that organizations must adopt a systematic, agile, data-driven, yet humanized, that's the word I bolded, yet humanized and forward-looking approach that takes into account the different aspects of people's needs and requirements. That word humanized to me just really, really struck a nerve. And I think we've all kind of experienced that even coming out of the pandemic, just how much more heart needs to go into the decisions and the strategic planning and the development of culture. Even if there is a data-driven approach to it, there has to be some heart and a humanized approach behind it. So that was an aha moment for me. I plan on sharing that with many.
Yeah, and how culture drives belonging. And so I always appreciate the conversation about is culture created top down or bottom up, or do you meet in the middle? How does, but if culture drives belonging, how do we build culture, right? A belonging culture.
Absolutely. And I am a person that believes cultures are built either intentionally or unintentionally. So we might want to make sure that we're intentionally building our cultures surrounding belonging as well. So one of the topics that was brought up and one of the data points is that diverse teams make better decisions 87% of the time. I'm going to say that one more time because I like that data point, that diverse teams make better decisions 87% of the time. How does that statement make you feel? And do you have any examples of where there was a diverse team decision that was really successful?
So if nobody else is going to jump in, just one thing, I didn't make up that number. If you send out the video link to everybody, or the PowerPoint link, any citations for survey results and data are hyperlinked to the actual source. So then you can look at that to make sure that, you know, I'm not just pulling your leg.
Awesome.
Not that we would ever thought that you were, Ron.
I believe in transparent facts and really looking at the data.
From the other side of it, a team that is not diverse. I've been involved in work to overcome racism in the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America for close to 30 years. And about 15 years ago, an organization called the EALA was formed, the European American Lutheran Association, to overcome racism. There were many groups, all of them groups of various ethnicities, working to help them because they were tiny minorities within the Lutheran Church. But our organization, the leadership steadfastly, I was on the board, and I tried to get them to become more diverse, and they refused. So it became a white-only organization working to overcome racism. Makes no sense to me. I ended up getting kicked off the board, but it was very, you know, it's been a real big issue for me.
Yeah. Something tells me, Harlan, that you are definitely very outspoken in the need to be more diverse. So
tell me about it.
I love that. I love that in you. I love that in you. Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I mean, I've been at tables as well where there's not a lot of diversity. And I think Ron really pointed this out too. I think there's a high focus on racial and ethnic diversity, but there's also that need to have diversity as it relates to income. And I mean, there's so many other aspects, gender, there's, you know, so many different aspects of diversity. And so I've been in rooms where I've also had to make that same comment, Harlan. It's great that we have, you know, ethnic minorities, but do we really have a representation of the community and population that we are trying to serve? And so really, really, really good point, Harlan. So I want to ask you guys, of course, diversity has been a key focal point, even more prevalent recently, but can I ask you guys, when did diversity, equity, and inclusion become important for your organization or agency? And let's have a real and transparent conversation. When did that become, and what was the cause of that? And I just reiterate with that question, because I know that's a bit of a loaded question, that this is a safe zone, that we are all learning from each other. But just wondering kind of what led to being more focused on equity, EDI. I said it right this time, Ron. What let you be more focused on EDI? Barb, did you have something you want to share?
Yeah, as far as the inclusion part, in our volunteer statement, we don't, we put it out there that we do not discriminate against ethnicity, gender, orientation, things like that, or ability or disability. We have a lot of people that are in the volunteer workforce that can just do outreach programs because of their, you know, lack of physical capability of, you know, lifting and things like that. I'm getting to be part of that little social committee because of a back issue, but we have never discriminated against anything like that. However, when we do get episodic volunteers of either a physical orientation or even an ethnic orientation, they enjoy the work and what we're doing while they're there, but they don't return. So that, I mean, that kind of bothers me personally, because I'm a people person and I know that once you're there, you're going to enjoy yourself. But I don't know whether some of the things that we do are like a cultural difference, which is why when they come out, they see that, oh, this is what they do and they're done. I don't know how we can, strive to maybe make it more, I don't want to say enjoyable, but more rewarding for them.
Yeah.
I don't know how we can, work to that end.
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that, Barb. I'm, please correct me if I'm wrong. You're kind of asking the question of what could be the potential cause that may be preventing them from wanting to return and continue to be a part of the organization and volunteer, and like how can we tweak and how can we adjust that?
Yeah.
Let's open that up to the group. Anyone have any suggestions or insights? Harlan?
I just want to mention a book that is written by Tracy Ellis, who's done so many of the workshops. And this points out that she identifies herself as an exceptional Negro, and she uses that word as a negative term, and says that because of the fact that she's been able to traffic and travel within the dominant culture in ways that are more, quote, acceptable, it differentiates her from many other African Americans. And so there's tremendous differences within groups that we think of as monolithic. White people may think of as monolithic, and they're not at all monolithic.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Harlan. And kind of, I wonder how that can, just kind of bridging that to Barb's comment. I wonder if the individuals who are volunteering, if they have a sense of, if maybe they're not having a sense of belonging, and it doesn't mean that it's intentional, because we've all been there. I mean, the heart, and like you said, you are such a people person, Barb. I know that for sure. I don't even think that it's something that's intentional, but maybe there's an opportunity to ask one of those volunteers back, to have them kind of evaluate a volunteer opportunity and ask their opinion on what could be tweaked and what could be adjusted and what could be changed. Because there might be something going on that you don't even see, that's possibly unintentionally being overlooked.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I would go right ahead, Barb.
I know a lot of our volunteers of color sometimes come out through like our college groups. We have a lot of the college groups come out to do service hours for community work and things like that. And they're really having a great time. But then the next time the group comes out, you might see a few of the same faces, but not that particular one.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to say that, someone of a non-white orientation will stand out. They will, but I mean, even white orientation stands out because you kind of gravitate on certain personalities or certain work ethics, things like that. But it seems like they'll come out once and you'll never see them again. And that happens with other ethnicities too. I'm not specifically, pulling on the Black culture, but I mean, we've had Eastern Indians, we've had Hispanics, we've had, other ethnicities that come out once or twice, and then you never see them again.
Yeah. I wonder, it could be a generational thing, also looking in terms of that as it relates to diversity and a sense of belonging there. And it also, I think we had a conversation maybe a couple of sessions ago about the way individuals with different backgrounds like to volunteer. And so it may just be that one and done, I may not have the availability in my schedule, but that one and done volunteer opportunity is what I'm available to do. It leads me to a comment that Ron stated earlier, is that those volunteers are those that seemingly may have more time available to volunteer, maybe white women who may be of a higher economic class. And maybe that might be part of it as well. Maybe those individuals are not fitting in that category, and maybe their availability or their style of wanting to volunteer is a little bit different. Ron, I see you want to make a statement there too.
Yeah, I think, and thank you, Martesha. So as I think about that, and again, this is not intended to offend folks, but if we generally see older white women of a higher social economic background have more free time, right? the assumption made by all of us shouldn't be that we have a one-size-fits-all volunteer program, staff program, support program, and it's only available to those who can devote that kind of attention to it. So what are we doing to adapt? And we do this in our construction bidding. It would be way easier for us to bid out our construction work if we put one bid out to say, we need a contractor who will do all this work. But what we know is in minority business space right now, it is very difficult because of the historic issues and racism and other other competing factors that minority business is able to meet, let's say, a $20 million contract term because of bonding and other things, are unable to do that. So how are we breaking the work down? So it's in bite-sized pieces that are adaptable to the folks who are in the market who want to give, because I think, and want to participate, because I think that's what we forget. We can't assume that folks don't want to give of their time, but that 20-hour-a-week volunteer position or that 5-hour-a-week volunteer position every week may be difficult for people. So what are we doing to expand our circle of volunteers or staff members or board members who can lean in on the stuff that's relevant to them, desirable to them in the amount of time that they have, right? And so let's be adaptable to the community that intends to serve or would desire to serve, in making it easier, if that makes sense. Because yeah, if you have, you know, an individual who's working full-time or maybe 2 full-time jobs, they still want a release to give back. You know, they're not going to be available 20 hours a week to volunteer, right?
Right. May I opine? This is Felicia. Can you guys hear me?
We sure can. Go
Yes.
right ahead.
So hearing all of this and listen to Ron, and it's not a matter of insulting people. This is what people have. If people have time to volunteer, they will volunteer. It's a culture thing, and I'm speaking only by knowing this. I'm Mexican by birth, American by choice. And my community navigator program that I have with my company, my navigators we started with a group of 10. We went to right now I'm having 19 navigators. They go around the communities and teach know your rights and do things with our funders' request. The difference that I have with this, and just like you said right now, our navigators are essential workers. Many of them work in factories and dealerships, and I have people who work in the Jiffy Lube and all of those, and yet they still manage to volunteer. But I don't request them to do 20 hours. I request them to do whatever they can in this lapse of time. And I have learned that there's so many different levels of understanding how they're going to share their vision with their community. And there's some people who have not finished elementary school, and there's some people who has college degrees, and they're all sharing their knowledge and where they are with the community that they are. I think that the biggest barrier to a volunteer base is poverty. They cannot afford to be volunteers for 20 hours and not have a 80 or 40-hour work. So our organization, ILEO, has partnered with Access to Justice, and they are giving us stipends for them. And that little bit of a stipend makes such a difference in the lives of those navigators, because they get in not paid but compensated for their time that they will never get back. And I think that that's the vision that we have to be able to see. Each time that somebody give you a 2 hour, it's time that they cannot get back, and they will be able to share with their family, but they decided to do this for this vision that we have as a company. So I think that that's the difference, that we need to not pay them, but value their time. And not by just saying, oh, thank you for the great job you did, but really value their time and help them to get out of poverty. Poverty is the biggest issue that we have in any community, Black, white, Hispanic, because there's plenty of poor people that I know that we need to elevate as well. There is plenty of people of in my community, in the Hispanic community, their poverty is the #1 problem. You can't survive if you don't have a job. And if you don't have a job, you can survive. You will never volunteer if you cannot find a meaningful work. So that's the way I see things, because I am in the community and I see how the community is having this kind of issues. So
I
thank you for.
appreciate that. I appreciate that, Felicia. Those are very, very good points. I noticed, Ron, you were off of mute there if you wanted to make another comment.
I do. I want to speak to that. So as the former CEO of the Housing Authority, I can share with you that there's a requirement on HUD's side that low-income individuals who are receiving housing support, who are not going to school, who are not elderly, who are not disabled, and there's a couple other exceptions, are to give volunteer time. And so I've always struggled with that because it seems like a mandate and could be counterproductive to people becoming employed, right? However, it is a requirement at the end of the day. And we did work with folks, and I'm assuming the Housing Authority still does work with folks to identify volunteer opportunities. And what we saw was that a number of our residents actually provided significant volunteer hours into our community. And so I'm only sharing that because if you're in need of volunteers, that may be a place to, to consider and connect with a group of individuals, to Felicia's point, who are of a different socioeconomic level. But these are amazing people. I had a chance to work with them for 8 years, and amazing, caring people who do want to give back, but who are also struggling to survive, right? So the ability to mirror their needs into the workforce with a volunteer opportunity that they're required to do, I think is a win-win for all, including the individuals. So I think that, the biggest opportunity to help bust folks out of poverty is, everybody's going to say a job, and I don't disagree with that, but it's a network, right?
Yeah.
It's a network of people surrounding you who care about you. And oftentimes that can come through volunteer service. And I saw it, where people connected and they built bonds. And so just something to think about. If there's a need, the Housing Authority should still have access to individuals. And I believe that requirement still exists.
Thank you for that, Ron. I was not aware that was a component. So definitely missed that. That was a missed opportunity on my part, but I really appreciate you sharing that. And also the comments that were shared from Felicia surrounding kind of that mindset of opportunity cost. Is that individual going to volunteer and miss out on potential income, especially, not to get overly political, but just looking at the minimum wage? And so, I mean, for us, if you're making $12, $13, $14 an hour, making $12 an hour, you're volunteering for even 2 hours, that's $24, but that might be $24 to us. For them, that is bread. That is being able to get oatmeal or the resources that their family needs for being able to pay their light bill or rent. And so I love the fact of looking at what that opportunity cost is for that person. Is there an opportunity to help them develop that network, which could lead them to increased work, employment opportunities? But it has to be communicated, and you have to build those relationships so those individuals will understand what the potential benefits are. It's not just about, painting a bench or whatever the case may be. It's really going to be some great opportunities in the future.
So I do
Yes,
have to
Ron?
add to that, Martesha, that's what equity is, right? That's providing perhaps extra compensation for a condition. I don't mean compensation necessarily in the terms of dollars and cents, but it could be, where you are trying to bring diverse people together. Sometimes we have to invest a little more in a way that we hadn't before. And that's equity, to create that space of belonging.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Ron. Absolutely. So there were some other points that we discussed during this presentation, but rather than getting into each of these individual points, I want to talk about just the overall concept of really digging into EDI. Are there any barriers that you're seeing in your organization that is preventing you from being able to maybe take it to that next level that you'd like to move to for EDI? Are there any barriers? Let's talk about that. So maybe we can share some tips with each other. And I won't be shy. I'll tell you guys right now, I'll give you guys just an example on one of the organizations that I'm working with. There is such a strong desire to do the work of EDI, but there is a feeling of being overwhelmed with getting into the work and all that needs to be accomplished. And so I guess I just open that up to you guys on how are you handling that, where it's to prevent that sense of being overwhelmed. I think Amanda, I don't know if you're off of mute there, if you wanted to share.
Yeah, I was just going to speak on some barriers at the Art Center. A lot of our patrons are, high socioeconomic status. They have the money. A lot of them are donors and can afford to, support the Art Center. And I think the hard part for us is making people aware that the Art Center is not just open to those people. Like, we're open to everyone. We have, free admission to the public. It's open to anyone that wants to come. We have scholarships available for students. We provide free classes for students that have, free or reduced lunch at the schools, but not everyone's aware of those things. And so I'd say one of the barriers is just, I don't know, getting people to realize that those things are available. How do we access those groups of people that we're missing out on?
Yeah. No, I definitely understand that. I think there's just throughout our region, throughout our communities, there's so many opportunities for individuals of diverse backgrounds to connect with us, but there's almost this missing link of how to better engage and let them know that those opportunities are there. Mm-hmm. And so I don't have the exact answer for that, but I think what I found is that partnerships are key, and not partnerships per se with the there's some well-known not-for-profit organizations. But I think there's a point where if we're looking to really dig in and work with some of our diverse populations, that we have to get into kind of those grassroots organizations and develop partnerships with those organizations that might not even be formally established just yet. I was just a couple of weeks ago, I was on a call with for AFP, for fundraising professionals, and there were probably 7 individuals who are not formal non-for-profits in this area. Hopefully they'll be able to move to that, but they're doing the work and they have the connections. I mean, they're able to bring people to events, and they just really have those relationships. And so I think that we all, myself included, have to figure out how we can get even more creative in engagement with not the normal agencies that we work with, but really getting with some of those grassroots organizations to better engage.
Thank you.
No problem. So I just want to ask you guys, are there any additional ideas that came from today's discussion that you want to share, something that you have now on your to-do list? You are going to somehow try to implement some of these ideas into your organizations. Again, any ideas related to today's discussion that you plan to implement at your organization, or at least would like to? Barb?
I found out from Renee that we encompass the generic national equity statement. I would like to see if we can develop one specifically for maybe just volunteers or paid and volunteer staff collectively. I think it's a wonderful idea. Maybe that will give us a little bit more insight on how to retain a more diversified volunteer base. And to be able to reach out more to the diverse population that we serve, because I know they're out there. I know they're out there. They come to the volunteer fairs, they come to our booth. We have a computer reel that goes on and on and on, and it's got diverse population showed, but we just can't grab them and can't keep them. So I think that would be one thing. And another thing too, what you said about the feedback from the episodic volunteers. The college groups that come out are some of the most diversified because they come out in the groups, and yes, I know this one, I know that one, and they know a bunch of people. So yes, it's going to be fun. But I think what we want to look forward to is to retaining those individuals within that group to make it a more diversified population. And then, you know, maybe send an email to the coordinator of that group and say, hey, can you pick brains? Can you ask them, what did you like? What did you not like? Did you feel welcome? Did you feel, you know, that you would want to do this again? I think that would help us to retain them as well.
Very, very good points, Barb. It seems like you got a lot of work on your hands coming up here.
Yes, I think so. I think COVID's done me in too, even though I'm not working anymore. I think it's gotten me, you know, thinking about a lot of things, and I really appreciate the efforts that you guys have done for the entire year putting these together. It's been wonderful.
Yeah.
I look forward to the
so
first
much.
Wednesdays of the month.
Love it. Love it. Ron, did you have something you wanted to add?
I did actually, as I'm thinking through this, you know, a couple things. Are we setting the space in, I am involved in a lot of, you know, racial equity issues. And so as we think about the work we're doing in your marketing and your website and your signage at sites, etc., are you showing diverse populations? Are, you know, do people see themselves there, not just when they're in your space, but do they see themselves advertised within your space, so to speak? And I think, you know, when we went through a rebranding at CASA this past year, and I can tell you on our website, it was mostly white folks. And so, you know, how do we expect to attract and retain folks of color and men, because it was almost all women. We know that the bulk of our kids are male, and so how are we working to attract males? So we reconsidered all of our graphics and our photos, and they're now much more representative of the children we serve, by showing volunteers and staff members who are more aligned with those individuals. But the other thing is, you know, what if we went bold? And so I'm part of an organization that's housing and redevelopment officials across the nation. And I'm on the National DEI committee. I haven't convinced them yet to change it to EDI, but someday. And so, but they decided to go bold. And so what if you had a public facing statement? And so the board of NARO has not only adopted an equity statement, but the board has adopted an atonement resolution. And so keep in mind, we're talking about housing, and we've supported housing systems since the 1930s. Housing is one of the areas where racism exists deeply. And so we recognize that the housing sector has been a significant contributor to institutional and legislated patterns of racial segregation, injustice, and equity. And so we created a resolution that we acknowledge this and say that no longer will we continue this. And so, I mean, to me, that's a bold move for an organization with tens of thousands of members. And, you know, when I was at the Alliance and we were having these conversations, it was amazing how many members suggested they wouldn't stay with us if we focused on equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so we said, well, that's the lens in which we must do our work. And if you don't want to be a member, we understand. And so understanding that you may have to lose some folks to gain others, that's going to be true in your volunteer base and your staff base. And that might just be the bold move you need to make. And bold public statements are also important.
I couldn't agree more with that, Ron. I know just with the RACVB and helping to kind of facilitate our commitment statements to our diverse community, there were 3 components. And that first one, of course, was listening, but that second one was accountability. And making a statement like that says we are holding ourselves accountable. Implementing it as a part of, our board policies is also that added piece of accountability. So it lives on regardless of the leadership here. But I couldn't agree more with that statement, because especially for our diverse populations, and I'm speaking personally, we need to hear that you acknowledge, that you realize that there's a problem. And putting something like that in writing is, that's a very big, bold move, very, very powerful. So Ron, I appreciate you sharing that as an example and another note that I'm taking down to share with others. I wanted to just give everyone an opportunity again, if there's anything else, any other aha moments that you want to share about today's discussion, today's very insightful discussion, I will say.
Martesha, this is something that I wanted to share. So much is, so many ideas, so many thoughts. The thought of co-creation, we use that a lot, that word a lot at NICNE, and how important co-creation is. We're involved in several initiatives in the community, and each of those have sort of made the commitment of nothing about us without us, so that we ensure that the voice is always heard. And one initiative we're working on is the Youth Mental Health System of Care. And one of the requirements of the funder for that, which is the Children's Healthcare Foundation, is that there's a steering committee. And so often we think of traditional steering committees, and we've flipped it on its head. And we've created what at this point calling a YES committee, which is a group of people with lived experience who will be the steering committee. And then every decision that's made goes through that committee. There they make the decision, yes or no. And that the professionals who are typically the steering committee become the support system for that group who's actually designing the system. So I wanted to share that. And I also wanted to share some work that we're doing with John Powell. And I had met him a year and a half ago in Chicago at a collective impact conference. And we did a very simple but incredibly powerful exercise where everyone in the room, there were 600 people in the room at that time, we could do that. And we went to connect with someone who didn't look like us. And what we did is we introduced ourselves, and all we said to each other was, I see you. I see you. And the tears that were streaming down people's face, because we often feel invisible. Certain people feel invisible. So something so simple as I see you, and then later on, just I hear you. And then, being seen, heard, and valued is a really strong part of the work that we're doing with John Powell. And then to connect with the last thing that you were talking about, one of the things that John has shared with us and that we've embraced is the idea that we have to understand our past, be bold and honest about the past in order to be able to move through to the future. So acknowledging what we've done wrong, not to put blame on anyone, right? But to acknowledge it, to acknowledge what hasn't worked in the past so that we can try other strategies moving forward. Just want to share that.
No, I love it. I love it. All great points. And again, I just thank you so much, Ron, for this insightful conversation. I have many aha moments, but I guess I'll just end off with the last aha moment that I have. And it goes back to the whole culture. We can come up with as much strategy as we want to, but if we're not changing and creating a culture of belonging and EDI, I said it right, Ron, and EDI, it's not going to really create a transformational change. So thank you again, Ron, for all of your help with this. And I will hand it off to Billy. Do you have anything else you'd like to add, Ron, before I hand it off to Billy?
No, just thanking you guys for allowing me to be with you today.
Harlan, did you have some thoughts to share?
Ron.
Oh, you're on mute. We'll unmute you.
One quick question, Ron. Procter & Gamble is blowing me away with their commercials. Do you know anything about their culture? Because I have not seen anything even close. I mean, some of their commercials almost bring me to tears.
Yeah, they've made some bold moves, and they've recognized that they're losing customers over it. But I'm interested to see how many customers they'll gain, because they hear more of the complaints than they do the positives.
Really?
But what an absolute wonderful example of, being bold and making statements to be inclusive. Just good work.
Such courage.
Yeah. I mean, you have to do that.
And creativity. They do it in beautiful ways. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
and they don't push themselves. They just say P&G, a little thing in the bottom of the screen, Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up. And thank you again, Ron, so much for joining us this morning and being part of and leading the discussion. And thank you, Martesha, and everyone that's joined us. I'm going to share my screen briefly just so I can share information about our next session. I will share today's recording, the evaluation, and the PowerPoint slides with you in a follow-up email. Next month, we are going to hear from Nancy Wiedrogo. She is with the U of I Extension Office, and she's going to talk about engaging older adults. So they have an Age Matters program, and they've done a lot of research around that and had some great success. And she's going to share their program, the data behind it, how it works, and why it works. So we're excited to do that. The following month, we have a presentation. It'll be our last in the series on engaging youth with disabilities. I'll send more details with you in an email in the coming weeks. And I will share, I know some of you work with human services organizations or have case managers, so I did want to share with you, we have a free community of practice discussion coming up on June 16th from 8:30 to 10 online via Zoom, where we're going to talk with several organizations that provide programs for adults beyond high school or GED education. So if they're looking for workforce development opportunities or certifications or even degrees, we will hear from several organizations to share information about that. I will also put that in the follow-up email and hope to see some of you there. And we would like again to say thank you and hope you have a great rest of your week. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Again, Ron, thanks much.